I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Jacob Steedman to the stage today. As developers, understanding application vulnerabilities and securing our software against malicious actors is crucial. So Jacob is going to be bridging the gap between developers and hackers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I'm Jacob Steedman. I'm an ethical hacker, and I work as a penetration tester at Vertical Structure here in Belfast. Prior to that, I was doing a PhD in Queen's University, and I did the MSc in cybersecurity there as well. During the MSc, I started to develop an interest in capture the flag hacking competitions, and that led on quite nicely into the penetration testing sphere. So this talk kind of came about through a few different questions. What is ethical hacking? How can we kind of clear up some of the ambiguity that surrounds a pen test whenever a development company approaches us to perform a pen test? And to highlight some of the most common vulnerabilities that we see day to day. We also took on an apprentice at the start of the year. Niall joined us, and that gives us an opportunity to reassess how we perform training internally. So at the end of the session, I'll talk about some of the best training platforms that are out there and how you can start delving into some of these attacks. So specifically, we're going to look at application testing today and take a walk through the pen test process, highlighting some of the most common vulnerabilities that we see throughout a pen test. So it starts with, for us, essentially with a scope. At a high-level view, it looks like this: a target for us to attack, accounts we need for testing, any areas of the application that we shouldn't attack during the test, and the dates that we're going to start and finish the engagement. A critical component in a web application test for us is a web proxy tool. It basically sits between our client-side application and the web server. This could be our browser and the service or the website that we're interacting with, and it's able to intercept application traffic, log any requests that we make, and then we can replay them. That looks something like this. This example demonstrates Burp Suite. You can see that as we interact with the web application, the web application proxy tool basically collects any requests that we make. You can see here it has a list of pages that we've interacted with, calls to the back end. We can then send these to the repeater tab, and that'll allow us to interact with them, change variables within the requests, and automate sending multiple requests. As we progress through this presentation, we'll look at how this can be used with more advanced functionality to perform attacks. So one of the first things I'll do whenever I'm beginning a pen test is to walk through the application and take a note of all the functions that are available on each page and create a function map. That allows us to walk through each function in turn, making sure that there are no areas that we've missed, and checking for any vulnerable functions that are within those and any areas of attack. So we'll start with a classic example here, a brute force attack. In this, we found usernames that were held within the comments section of the OWASP GShop app, and then attempt to brute force the user's passwords. In the web proxy, it looks something like this. We make a request to log in, and we can see that it's been denied. As this is a test application, we know the credentials for the user, so we'll send this to the repeater tab, input valid credentials as well, so that then we can see what a request response looks like when it's got valid credentials versus invalid credentials, and then as we're trying to brute force this, we know what we're looking for. So the valid request we're looking for is this. We can then send that to the intruder tab, which allows us to automate sending a large volume of requests with different parameter values. So we can see here, we just input a random list of test information and one correct password. So we'll just use the test multiple times. That'll do for now. Include the correct user password, and then simply click Start Attack, and this will run through each of these parameter values until we get a correct login. Mitigating these issues, lockout policies, rate limiting, CAPTCHAs, and multi-factor authentication, and strong password policies. It's not so much an issue we see with people knowing how to remediate brute force attacks, but it's where they remediate them. So it's not just a matter of protecting passwords. MFA should also be protected against brute force attacks. Any user verification that's performed by the application should be protected against brute force. And one of the most severe vulnerabilities that I've found in an application was the ability to reset all users on the platform's passwords through the reset code that was sent to the email, because you could brute force that code. And that's a lot easier than brute forcing the password, because reset code's always going to be 6 digits. So you've got a million combinations to try there, and you can brute force every user's password in a short matter of time. So now that we have valid user credentials, we can return to our function map, strike off the fields that we've targeted, and then take a look at what functions are available to an authenticated user. So we can see here that they have the ability to view their account, a basket, and they can search for items as well. Another common attack vector that we see is HTML injection. It's a really simplistic injection attack. You can see here that the parameter passed into the search field is returned in the response. So if we attempt to inject HTML code into this field, we will see that the application actually renders that. And a malicious actor could use this in phishing attacks to try and inject malicious links or malicious forms that can redirect a user to their page. And we'll take a look in a second. So you can see there, click me to win. And if the user clicks on that, they're redirected to the malicious page. Well, we'll take a look now at how this could be escalated into an XSS injection attack. So in the same field that you're able to inject JavaScript code, and that will trigger whenever the user loads the page. This can be used to transmit session tokens to a malicious domain and allow a hacker to essentially take over that user's account. There's a typo in it. And there, the XSS is triggered. Similarly to HTML injection then is email HTML injection, which attempts to insert the value into an email transmitted from the application to the user. So in this example, we can see that we put the HTML string in the user's name, and whenever the application tries to contact that user, it renders the link. This is a really common one, even when applications handle HTML code being returned to the web page. Emails often don't follow that, and it can be used for phishing because that email looks like it's come from the trusted source of the web application that a user would be expecting. And obviously they can hide it a lot better than click here to win. OS command injection then is a similar attack to the other command injections, but in this one you're attempting to inject operating system commands at the server that'll run and make a connection back to us. So in this simple example, you can see that you can append the server is attempting to ping an IP address that you put in, but you can use a semicolon to append additional commands after that ping command. You can see here, you can list the file system on the remote server, or you can query the user URL, and then this can be escalated further into full command line access. So we're using a tool called reverse shell generator here that allows you to input various parameters that you need for your reverse shell. So different operating systems, different programming languages, the IP address of your listener, which is going to be on your attack box that's waiting for a connection from your victim's machine. And whenever that reverse shell string then is inputted into this operating system OS command injection vulnerability, it'll create a listener back to our attack box, and we can then take full command line access of that server. CSV injection is another similar injection attack, but this one attempts to inject into CSV files. This is actually really common. You see a lot of people, even if they're handling other types of injection attacks, they'll be vulnerable to this. If any fields within the application are exported to a CSV file, you can inject equations using the equals. So in this example, we've got equals 1 plus 1. And when that's exported to the CSV file, it becomes 2. You might be thinking, big deal, but there are ways to escalate this into a more serious attack. So the most reliable one that we come across is to inject links into the CSV using the equals hyperlink. And then you can use your malicious domain. And if a user, when viewing that CSV file, clicks on that link, it'll transmit the contents of certain cells to their malicious domain, allowing them to export data from that database. Alternatively, there have been a couple of POCs in the past that give a full remote code execution using the equal command, which is now deprecated because of the serious security issue that presented. It can be enabled, I believe, in certain spreadsheet viewers, but it's not enabled by default, so we don't tend to see it effective in many penetration tests. So it's easy to point out these attacks, but you might be thinking, how do you actually find which injection strings to use at which points? Parameter fuzzing is one crude way that you can do this, but it's very effective. Essentially send large amounts of junk data to this is a really long video, I'll skip forward a bit. Send large amounts of junk data to the server, just random malicious strings. You can see in this one, we're using the big list of naughty strings. You can just copy that into the intruder function here, and then send huge amounts of different data, malicious strings, HTML, different command injection attacks, and see how the server responds. And by filtering by response, you can often determine which strings will be effective, which will not. So we send a large volume of data to the server and then filter through these and see which ones are likely to be worth a closer look. It just helps to sort of quickly automate where you should be looking and which attacks are most likely. So injection remediation then, input sanitization, output sanitization, input encoding, testing, test all your parameters, and even if you implement different forms of sanitization or encoding, it's always worth testing and testing again because there's so many bypasses for these. And then we go back to our function map, strike off what we've viewed so far and see what's left. So the basket functionality is another one that sounds interesting to us, so we'll take a closer look at that. We can see that in this instance, it's vulnerable to an IDOR vulnerability. The IDOR vulnerability is basically a combination of poor naming conventions and broken access controls. In this simple example, you can see that the user's basket is retrieved based on their user ID, which is just a sequential value applied to each user that signs up from 1 to whatever. So we can then use that just to cycle through users' baskets, basket 1, basket 2, basket 3, and so on. The IDOR vulnerability specifically relates to this kind of insecure naming convention, but it's most effective when it's coupled with broken access controls as well. So we can see here that we're able to cycle through the various users' baskets and retrieve their data. So one thing that a pitfall people fall into with this is thinking that a GUID or some kind of randomly generated string will fix this. So in this example now, their user baskets are no longer retrieved on a simple numeric value. It's using a more complex GUID. So we can't simply just cycle through numeric values to retrieve other users' baskets. But let's say that this web application also implements a get users API endpoint. And when you get users, it returns a list of all users in the application and their GUIDs. Now you're back to square one with the broken access controls, and you can just cycle through each of the retrieved user IDs and retrieve their baskets. So next up, a couple of notable file upload vulnerabilities. We often see that clients perform decent file input or file upload sanitization and restrictions, but what if you have certain file types that you want your users to use? So you say you legitimately want people to upload PDF files. There are methods of exploiting that. In this example, you can see that we have a simple PDF file, but overlaid on this file is a malicious URL. So if the user opens that and clicks anywhere within that, they're going to be redirected to the malicious domain. And that is simply caused by injecting this code on the left-hand side. Another one, slightly more serious, is a malicious Word file upload. So applications that allow Word files are often vulnerable to this issue. A malicious actor can inject a reverse shell into the macro of a Word file. And when the user opens that, they will be, their reverse shell connection will be connected back to the attack machine. So you can see here that the Windows machine is connected back to our Kali box. Now, in reality, if a user tries to open this macro-infected Word file, they're going to get a warning saying, this has potentially malicious content in it. Are you sure you want to open it? But we all know someone will open that. Malicious SVG file uploads. So SVG files, again, something we see a lot of applications are vulnerable to if they allow SVG files to be uploaded. SVG files can contain JavaScript code, so you open up potential then to be infected by cross-site scripting vulnerabilities or open redirect vulnerabilities, and it's something often overlooked when we're testing applications. So how do you remediate against these issues? Content type validation, which people often do, but it can be bypassed. Secure file storage, content validation, and content disarm and reconstruct. So this is trying to strip any malicious content that may be, say, appended to a PDF file or a macro within a Word document, and then present it back to the user in a secure manner. File signature checks as well. And scan all your files that are being uploaded for viruses. So I don't have a good demonstration of this one, but I just thought it was worth a dishonorable mention, just some web token attacks. Basically, we see a lot of different misconfigurations with this. So brute forcing a secret, I've seen that in the wild a couple of times this year. Unverified tokens, so it might seem like obviously you're going to verify your JWT, but in reality, there are two functions that could be called when you're handling them at the back end. .verify, which will verify the signature, and just .decode, which will decode the data, and just, so a malicious actor could put in any data they want within that JWT, and it won't be verified. How do you remediate this? Strong secret keys, understand your JWTs, keep the JWT library up to date. Secure the KID field, so the key that you're using. Use revoke tokens when they're no longer valid. Implement strict expiry times. So with that comes the concept of a refresh token. So you have a short-lived access JWT token and a much longer-lived refresh token. But within that, you enter a whole new minefield of potential misconfigurations that we often see. So you need to make sure your refresh tokens are only usable once. So my top 3 exploits that I've seen in the wild over the last couple of years, as I've already mentioned, the password reset code brute force. It basically allowed me to request a password reset for any user within the application, and then brute force their password reset code and change everyone's password back to my password. An admin machine takeover via an in-app calendar. So this is basically a calendar function that was in the application that was affected by an IDOR vulnerability. So I could insert calendar events into anyone else's calendar as if it was their own event that they'd put in. And that was coupled with reverse shell file upload vulnerability. So say I self-register as a user, I inject an event into an administrator's calendar, and then insert a reverse shell file into that event. Whenever the admin goes to view that event, it triggers the reverse shell file upload, and I then have command line access to their machine. RCE, then remote code vulnerabilities, remote code execution vulnerabilities are always a good one to see on the web server via PHP template injection. So the web application allowed users to alter how they wanted their homepage to look. So you could inject a PHP reverse shell payload within that template, so that any user that viewed your homepage would be affected by that reverse shell. And this would all mean nothing without our final report that's delivered to the client. So this is what a general report looks like for us: a description of the finding, steps to reproduce, the affected assets, and detailed remediation advice. It's really common for fixes to be implemented for vulnerabilities that introduce additional vulnerabilities or still leave rooms for bypassing. So the remediation advice is always key with this one, just to make sure that the client knows exactly how to fix issues that aren't going to introduce more issues. So if anyone's interested in some of these concepts, there's a lot of training out there. There's too much training, so I broke down some of the best training that's available at the minute for different reasons. Hack the Box Academy is probably one of my favorites. It's relatively new over the last couple of years, and they're developing a lot of new content all the time. They have full learning pathways. So the one I'm working through at the minute is a pen test pathway with our apprentice Niall. They have check-specific pathways for anyone's interested in the UK government cybersecurity certifications, bug bounty ones, and just last month they also released a SOC analyst one, which looks like it'd be really good for anyone that's working as an internal security role. They're really practical classes. Basically, they'll spin up for the pen test one, they'll spin up a vulnerable server, and you can just have a go trying to exploit the vulnerability. For the SOC analyst one, I'm assuming that they'll spin up servers that have been compromised, and you have to sort of figure out how to find where the compromises come from and what's been affected. They're also really good value for money. I mean, I think a full year for the pen tester pathway is £300, and that includes an exam. So compared to most corporate training stuff, this is really cheap. It kind of looks like this. So as you're going through the course, you'll have a whole lot of theory content at the top of the page. And then when you scroll down, you'll be presented with an attack box in browser that you can use to exploit and send exploits to their vulnerable services. And then you answer a couple of questions or submit a couple of flags to prove that you've achieved that. Yeah, there's the 3 different roles they have at the minute: a bug bounty hunter one, a pen tester one, and a SOC analyst one. Try Hack Me is also, it's been around for a lot longer than the Hack the Box Academy course. They have a lot of varied modules. They have a lot of more advanced modules as well. And it's really good for learning specific exploits, I think, rather than having a full learning pathway that's like a 1-year course. You can just go onto this, look up a specific exploit that you want to learn, and have a go hacking it. They also usually involve a couple of different levels, so it'll give you like the most basic type of vulnerability that you can exploit, and then they'll put in a couple of different protection mechanisms, and you've got to try and bypass them. So. Port Trigger Academy, similar. It gives you specific vulnerabilities to exploit, and it's got a few different remediation levels to it as well, so you can get more and more complex. It's specific to web application vulnerabilities. Certifications, if you're interested in trying to actually become a pen tester or some sort of security role, there are a number of certifications out there. The check ones are good. The check team member one's really accessible, so if anyone that's at an entry level, I would highly recommend going for that. If you were working your way through the Hack the Box Academy course, if you finished that course, you would very comfortably be able to complete the check team member certification. You could probably go for the OSCP as well, which is one of the older, better known ones. It's got the 24-hour exam. You've got to hack into 4 or 5 machines in 24 hours. So the Hack the Box Academy course, I'd really recommend if you're trying to go for that. Hack the Box Academy, then, they have this CPTS, which is their kind of version of the OSCP, but it's over 10 days. So you've got 10 days to hack into, I think, maybe 10 different boxes and find the flags. And the check team lead one is the UK government sort of higher level pen tester certification. So as I kind of alluded to, if it was up to me, I would recommend going for Hack the Box Academy and then OSCP and check exams following that. I think that would be the quickest way. Within a year, if you were thinking about getting into this, you could probably go for your OSCP and have a really good, solid cybersecurity certification. If you'd like any of this content, we're also developing a YouTube series that kind of goes over the same sort of stuff, just common exploits that we find through 2 different channels or playlists here. So we've got an executive summary one that tries to break things down in under a minute, and a technical summary one that's less than 5 minutes. That's everything. Are there any questions?
One question. Yes.
It's like a real whistle-stop tour of vulnerabilities there.
It's going to seem like a plant, Jacob, but it's not, I promise. I'm always interested, and I know that one of the things we have to work on with this when we do a pen test is around the ethical side of it. So you mentioned right there the ethical side. What are the kind of requirements that you have to have in place before you start on a pen test with a client? Because you can't just go straight in.
Yeah, there's a lot of documentation that's required prior to that, and there's a whole team of people involved in getting to the level where I can actually begin a pen test. So we obviously have various different non-disclosure agreements with the client and rules of conduct and a precise agreement of the scope. I give a high-level view of what a simple scope is there, but realistically, in real-world engagement, we have a much more well-defined list of actions that we're going to perform, that the client wants us to perform, and what we're not going to do as well. So there's a lot of documentation that's signed up before a pen test really begins.
Brilliant. Any more questions? Yep. Okay. I'm really going to get my steps up today, aren't I?
Hello. How worried are you that your job is going to be replaced by AI, just writing all of this shell code and performing all the red team reviews?
I'm starting to get a wee bit more worried. I'm tempted to try and develop some sort of AI-powered pen tester, but then I'm worried that that's going to be the death of me. So I think we're safe for the meantime. I think there's a lot of things that AI is doing well at the minute, and I think it'll become a really useful tool for automating security scanning and that sort of stuff. But there are complex attacks that are just AI at the minute wouldn't be able to chain together a pen tester or a human can. And I think we're probably a fair way off replacing pen tests with AI, but not security testing. I think it'll become really useful for security testing, but not for pen testing necessarily.
So the secret is to build it and never tell anyone about it.
Sorry, I can't really hear.
The secret is to build it and then never tell anyone about it.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Fantastic. Any other questions? Got time for one more? I'm coming. Hold on. Actually, do you know what? We'll squeeze in, so we'll talk quickly and we can get 2 questions.
Thanks for your talk. Mine's pretty quick. So you talked about the technical side of pen testing, which is around the actual application structure and stuff, but how do you test the social aspects? Because a lot of these big, data leaks and stuff comes from someone gaining a credential through social engineering and then just like privilege escalation and stuff. So how does that dovetail with pen testing?
Yeah, so it's something we've been working on actually over the last year. When it comes to application testing, not necessarily something we would consider, other than the fact we were given credentials for different user levels within that. But for network testing and infrastructure testing, it's a really big thing. So we'll often perform assumed compromise testing in addition to outside testing. So the client will give us different levels of access to their network, or just a basic AD user access, and then we try to perform exploits from that user's point of view. And during that, we'll tend to work quite closely with the client's blue team or internal security team to ensure that they're able to pick up on all our malicious activity along the way. So it's a very common one. When you see big exploits in the newspaper, it's usually about someone's been social engineered. That's their foothold in. So if assumed compromise testing, I think, is absolutely essential, because that's what happens a lot of the time.
So in your opinion, what's the most common cause of a vulnerability? I mean, like root cause?
Sorry?
What's like the most common root cause of a vulnerability?
The most common brute force vulnerability?
Yeah.
Probably MFA. I mean, everyone's pretty on the ball about not brute forcing passwords these days, but MFA a lot of the time is still, multi-factor authentication a lot of the time is still brute forceable, we find, which just reverts you back to single factor authentication then. But we did have a discussion internally about whether is brute forceable MFA less secure than no MFA? If you assume that you're secured by MFA and you're not, is that worse than just not being secured by MFA?
Jacob, amazing. Thank you so much. Big round of applause, please, for Jacob.
Thanks.